India's Grand Strategy 2035 is not a document written in a closed conference room. It is a living, evolving doctrine shaped by history, geography, national ambition, and the realities of an increasingly turbulent world. As New Delhi moves into the mid-21st century, it faces a strategic environment defined by three major powers: China, Pakistan, and the United States, each posing unique challenges, yet each offering unique opportunities. In this film, we explore how India plans to navigate, resist, balance, and eventually outmaneuver all three simultaneously through a carefully calibrated grand strategy that blends military power, economic influence, diplomatic agility, technological advancement, and civilizational soft power.
Before we move forward, please like, share, and subscribe Strategic Vanguard and be up to date with the latest news and happenings from the world of defense, strategic, and international affairs. Tune into our video channels in YouTube and Rumble. And if you want to hear the audio version, tune into our Strategic Vanguard channels in Spotify and Amazon Music.
India's strategy for 2035 is not about confrontation. It is about positioning, making sure that New Delhi occupies the central pivot of Asian geopolitics, forcing China to react to India rather than the other way around, compelling Pakistan into irrelevance through overwhelming capability and economic asymmetry, and engaging the United States as a partner without ever becoming dependent or compromised. To understand this strategy, we begin by acknowledging the structural forces shaping India's choices. China, a rising superpower, seeks to dominate Asia through economic coercion, military pressure, and maritime expansion. Pakistan, though much weaker, continues asymmetric warfare and nuclear blackmail as tools to restrain India's strategic space. The United States, while a partner, has historically used alliances and military aid to influence the policies of regional powers. India's challenge is clear: rise without being contained, defend without being destabilized, and partner without being compromised. In many ways, India's Grand Strategy 2035 begins with geography. Most nations are prisoners of their geography, but India is a beneficiary of it. With the Himalayas as a wall, the Indian Ocean as a shield, and a central position in the Indo-Pacific, India's map defines its destiny. New Delhi's planners recognize that the Indian Ocean is the true battleground where China's ambitions and India's interests collide. By 2035, India aims to convert the Indian Ocean region into a sphere of uncontested influence, ensuring that no foreign navy, not even the United States Navy, operates here without acknowledging India's role. This begins with the expansion of naval power, including 3 aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and a maritime domain awareness network stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Malacca Strait. But military power alone is not enough. India is building a grand narrative. The Indian Ocean is not just a region, it is India's strategic backyard. As China expands its Belt and Road Initiative, building ports from Pakistan's Gwadar to Sri Lanka's Hambantota to Djibouti in Africa, India's counter is not to mirror China's investments, but to weaponize geography through a strategy of chokepoint dominance. Whoever controls the chokepoints controls the future of Asia. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands sit like a dagger pointed at China's belly, the Malacca Strait. By transforming these islands into a forward military hub with air bases, naval bases, and long-range surveillance capabilities, India effectively holds China's economic lifeline at its mercy. This is not about threatening war, it is about deterrence. China must think twice before escalating on the Himalayan border, because India can escalate at sea, where China is at its weakest. India's Grand Strategy 2035 is, therefore, asymmetric. Instead of matching China's tanks with tanks or missiles with missiles, India chooses the battlefield where China is vulnerable. In the Himalayas, the terrain favors defenders, making large-scale offensives extremely expensive. India's doctrine is simple: hold the Himalayas, dominate the Indian Ocean, influence the Indo-Pacific, and shape the global narrative. Meanwhile, Pakistan fits into this strategy not as a rival, but as a manageable nuisance. By 2035, Pakistan's relevance to India's grand strategy depends entirely on its relationship with China. India knows Pakistan cannot compete economically or militarily. But Pakistan can still cause instability by exporting terrorism or leveraging its nuclear arsenal. This is why India's real objective is to cut off Pakistan's strategic oxygen, its utility to China. When China realizes Pakistan is too unstable, too economically weak, and too unreliable, Beijing will deprioritize it, turning Pakistan into a liability rather than an asset. India accelerates this process through calibrated military pressure, diplomatic isolation, and overwhelming economic contrast. When India's GDP becomes 12 to 15 times larger than Pakistan's, as projected for 2035, Pakistan's strategic position collapses. India does not need to defeat Pakistan. India only needs to outgrow it. On the diplomatic front, New Delhi implements a dual strategy: isolate Pakistan internationally, while engaging its civil society indirectly through cultural soft power and people-focused narratives. The goal is not to destroy Pakistan, but to render its military deep state model obsolete. The real contest, however, is with China. China views India as the only Asian country capable of challenging its hegemonic ambitions. India knows this, and so the strategy becomes layered. First, internal balancing. Enhance India's own economic, technological, and military capabilities. Second, external balancing. Build strategic partnerships with nations that fear Chinese dominance. Japan, Australia, Vietnam, the Philippines, France, and even the United States. Third, diplomatic balancing. Engage China economically while resisting Chinese influence politically and militarily. India never seeks direct confrontation. Instead, India patiently builds strength until the balance tilts in its favor. But the most delicate part of India's 2035 strategy is its relationship with the United States. The US is not an enemy, but it is also not a benign power. Washington's primary objective is to maintain US primacy in Asia. This means the US does not want China to dominate, but it also does not want India to rise uncontrollably. American strategy has always been to support India enough to counter China, but not enough to overshadow US interests. India understands this deeply. Thus, the core of India's approach is strategic autonomy. Cooperate with the US, where interests align, but resist dependence at all costs. India buys weapons from Russia, the US, France, and domestic industry, ensuring no single nation can use defense dependence as leverage. India participates in the Quad but refuses to make it a military alliance. India expands ties with the US, but keeps its own foreign policy independent, supporting Iran, engaging Russia, partnering with ASEAN, and mediating global disputes without Washington's approval. India positions itself as the voice of the global South, a role the US cannot easily counter. By 2035, the world will likely be multipolar, and India intends to be one of the poles, not an ally, not a client, but a power center. The most remarkable transformation, however, will come from India's military modernization. India's 2035 doctrine integrates air, land, sea, space, and cyber capabilities into a unified command structure. The Agni-V and future Agni-V6 missiles extend India's nuclear deterrence deeper into Asia. The Tejas Mk2, AMCA, and unmanned combat systems shift air power towards self-reliance. The Indian Navy's second and third aircraft carriers enable power projection across the Indo-Pacific. The Defense Space Agency secures India's satellites and develops anti-satellite capabilities. The Defense Cyber Command protects India from digital warfare. This is not an arms race. It is domain dominance, ensuring that India cannot be coerced or threatened by China or the United States. But India's grand strategy is not purely military. It is economic. India's goal is to become the world's third largest economy by 2035. Economic strength translates directly into geopolitical influence. New Delhi seeks to build resilient supply chains away from China, attract global manufacturing, and become the backbone of the Indo-Pacific's digital economy. India's production-linked incentive schemes, semiconductor missions, green hydrogen plans, and artificial intelligence roadmaps are designed to ensure India becomes not just a consumer market, but a global tech and industrial hub. This strategy reduces dependence on China while giving India leverage over multinational corporations and Western economies. Meanwhile, India builds energy corridors connecting the Middle East to South Asia. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, AMCA, if completed by 2035, will be one of the world's most important trade routes. It bypasses China's Belt and Road Initiative and shifts global commerce through Indian territory. India also weaponizes diaspora, using its 35 million strong global community as a silent diplomatic force that influences politics, markets, technology, and academia worldwide. Unlike China's state-controlled diaspora networks, India's diaspora is integrated, influential, and respected. The world's tech giants, universities, and governments all rely on Indian talent. This soft power becomes a strategic asset. But the final layer of India's Grand Strategy 2035 is civilizational. For the first time since independence, India is embracing its identity not merely as a nation-state, but as a civilizational state. This concept positions India not as a Western replica or an Asian counterweight, but as an ancient, culturally rich, philosophically deep civilization offering an alternative model to both American liberalism and Chinese authoritarianism. India's message to the world is simple. A multipolar world is safer, more stable, and more just than a world dominated by a single superpower. This civilizational narrative appeals to Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, regions that distrust China and feel patronized by the West. As India rises, it becomes their voice, speaking at the United Nations, the G20, BRICS, and the Global South summits. And yet, India remains cautious. It knows great powers have fallen not from external threat, but from internal weakness. That is why India's 2035 strategy also focuses intensely on internal stability, investing in infrastructure, digital governance, social unity, and economic diversification. A strong India cannot be contained. A divided India cannot rise. India's planners understand that a rising India threatens the interests of both China and the US. China fears losing dominance. The US fears losing primacy. Therefore, both will attempt to influence India's decisions. China will use coercion, the US will use persuasion. But India's strength is its ability to say no. No to military alliances, no to foreign interference, no to defense dependence, no to economic blackmail, and yes, to partnerships based on mutual respect. India's Grand Strategy 2035 is not anti-China, anti-Pakistan, or anti-US. It is pro-India. It is a strategy of self-reliance in defense, independence in foreign policy, dominance in the Indian Ocean, leadership in the Global South, resilience in technology, and confidence in civilizational identity. In this world order, China cannot bully India, Pakistan cannot destabilize India, and the United States cannot control India. Instead, all three must engage India on India's terms. And that, ultimately, is the heart of the strategy, to convince the world that the 21st century cannot be shaped without India's participation and cannot be stable without India's leadership. India becomes the indispensable nation of the East, a nation too strong to ignore, too independent to influence, and too stable to undermine. A nation that balances power without being consumed by it. A nation that seeks peace without appearing weak. A nation that rises without threatening others, yet refuses to be threatened by anyone. India's Grand Strategy 2035 is not about outmuscling China militarily, isolating Pakistan diplomatically, or rejecting the United States strategically. It is about outmaneuvering all three through a blend of power, patience, and principle. If India successfully implements this strategy, then by 2035, New Delhi will stand not as a regional power, not as a balancing power, but as a shaping power. The architect of a new Asian equilibrium. And in that equilibrium, India occupies the central seat, guiding the destiny of the world's most important region, defining the rules of engagement for the great powers, and ensuring that the Indo-Pacific remains free, open, multipolar, and fundamentally Indian in character. This is India's Grand Strategy 2035, a strategy of vision, resolve, and destiny.
Thank you for joining us on this Strategic Vanguard deep dive. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you fresh deep dives every Wednesday and Saturday here on YouTube and Rumble, and you can also catch the audio versions on Spotify and Amazon Music. Just search for Strategic Vanguard Deep Dive. For more insights, articles, and discussions, subscribe to our blog at strategicvanguard.com. Your support helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis on defense, geopolitics, and strategy. Until next time, stay informed, stay strategic.